The Galactic Empire. They checked the readings twice. That can't be a human vessel. The outer veil was not a place where things happened. It was a stretch of dead space at the far edge of Dominion territory. A graveyard of broken asteroids, cold gas clouds, and the leftover wreckage of wars that everyone had already forgotten. No trade routes passed through it. No colony ships stopped there. Even pirates avoided it because there was nothing worth stealing. The Dominion fleet had been stationed there for 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks, the most exciting thing that had happened was a minor coolant leak on one of the support ships. Admiral Koros stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and stared at the star map on the main screen. His 4 compound eyes were half closed. He was bored. Even the ship itself seemed bored, humming quietly at low power, going through the motions of a patrol that nobody believed was necessary. Koros was a Valran, tall, gray-skinned, with long arms and a flat, wide head that had evolved over millions of years to detect the faintest changes in pressure and light. His species had built the Dominion from nothing, spreading across 400 star systems over 2,000 years. They were not used to surprises. They had planned for everything. Which is why, when the sensor console on the left side of the bridge let out a sharp, confused beep, everyone on deck froze. The young sensor operator, a Velran named Preth, leaned forward in his seat and stared at his screen. He tapped it twice with one long finger, the way one taps a screen when they are sure it is broken and they just needed to confirm that. The screen was not broken. "Admiral," Preth said slowly, "I have a contact." "A ship?" "I think so, sir." Preth's voice had a strange quality to it. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. Confusion mixed with unease. "It came out of the debris field on the eastern edge of the grid. It is small, very small." Koros walked over to the sensor station and looked at the data himself. The contact was real. It was moving at a steady speed, not fast, not slow, right through the middle of the dead zone, as if it had every right to be there. The hull signature matched nothing in the Dominion database. The energy output was strange, low in some areas, oddly high in others, pulsing in a pattern that made no sense to the diagnostic software. "Run the identification scan," Koros said. Preth ran it. The system came back with a single word: unknown. "Run it again." Preth ran it again. Same result. Koros straightened up and looked at the main view screen. The debris field was a dark smear of broken rock and old metal against the faint light of distant stars. Somewhere in that mess, a ship was moving. A ship that his fleet's computers did not recognize, could not classify, and could not explain. "Get me a visual," he said. The camera system swept across the debris field, tracking the energy signature. It took a few seconds. Then the image appeared on the main screen, and every officer on the bridge went quiet. The ship was small. Not small like a scout vessel or a patrol craft, small like it had no business being out here at all. It was roughly rectangular, with rounded edges and a hull that looked like it had been repaired many times over. There were visible patches on the outer plating, sections where the original metal had been replaced with something slightly different in color, like a quilt made from whatever material had been available at the time. One of the engine pods was slightly off-center. There was a long, dark scar running along the left side of the hull, the kind of mark left by a plasma burn that had been mostly but not completely fixed. It looked, in simple terms, like a very tired old truck. And yet it moved through the debris field with complete confidence. It did not slow down for the drifting rocks. It did not alter course more than necessary. It threaded through the obstacles with small, precise adjustments, like a creature that knew exactly where its own body was in space at all times. Tactical Officer Brem, standing to Korus's right, said what everyone was thinking. That thing should not be able to move like that. Chorus agreed. A ship that size, with that kind of hull damage, and that irregular energy output, should have been crawling. It should have been broadcasting a distress signal. Instead, it was flying. Not fast, but with a calm, settled certainty that made Chorus feel, in a way he did not entirely like, that the ship was not lost or in trouble, but simply passing through. Inside the ship, Lieutenant Junho was eating a protein bar. He was sitting in the pilot's seat, feet up on the edge of the console, one hand on the manual flight stick, steering through the debris field more by feel than by instrument. The cockpit was small and worn, the kind of space that had been lived in for a long time. There were scratches on the panels, a crack in the corner of the main display that had been there so long nobody noticed it anymore, and a small sticker on the side of the navigation screen that said, "Don't panic," in faded letters. Junho was 29 years old. He had a calm face, short dark hair, and the general look of someone who had spent too much time in deep space and not enough time sleeping. He was not especially tall or especially strong. He looked, in simple terms, like a fairly ordinary young man who happened to be flying through the most dangerous stretch of Dominion space alone. He took another bite of his protein bar and checked the long-range scanner. 400 ships. He had seen them 20 minutes ago and had not changed his course. He had, however, called back to the cargo hold. "Dara," he said through the intercom, "we have company." From the cargo hold came the sound of metal hitting metal. A brief silence, and then the voice of Engineer Dara, slightly muffled, as if she had something in her mouth, which she did, because she was holding a wrench between her teeth, while using both hands to work on the coolant regulator. "How much company?" she asked. "Fleet-sized." A pause. "Dominion?" "Looks like." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Are they blocking the route?" "Not yet." "Then keep going," Dara said. "I'll have the secondary drive back online in 40 minutes. Junho finished his protein bar, crumpled the wrapper, and tossed it toward the small waste bin in the corner. It went in. He allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction, then turned his attention back to the debris field ahead. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Chorus watched the small battered ship emerge from the eastern edge of the debris field and continue moving, steady, calm, and completely unbothered, directly toward his fleet. "Get me a communications channel," Chorus said quietly. Preth opened one. Chorus leaned forward. "Unknown vessel, you have entered Dominion-controlled space. Identify yourself immediately, or you will be considered a hostile contact." The channel was open for 3 seconds of silence. Then a calm, slightly tired human voice came back. "Give me a second. I'm finishing something." Chorus stared at the screen. Preth checked the translation twice, because he was certain he had misheard. "The Galactic Empire. They checked the readings twice. That can't be a human vessel." The silence on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion lasted about 4 seconds. Then everyone started talking at once. Tactical Officer Brem said something about charging the forward guns. Navigator Yelk pulled up the species database and started searching. 2 junior officers near the back of the bridge were whispering to each other in a way that Chorus did not like. Not panic, but something on the edge of it, the kind of whisper that spreads fast through a crew if it is not stopped quickly. Chorus raised one long gray hand, and the bridge went quiet. He looked at the open communications channel. The light was still blinking, the connection was still live. On the other end, somewhere inside that battered little ship, a human being had just told the admiral of the 4th Dominion Patrol Fleet to wait a moment. Chorus had been in the Dominion military for 31 years. He had commanded fleets in 2 border wars and 1 full planetary siege. He had dealt with pirates, separatists, rogue AI systems, and 1 very memorable incident involving a species that communicated entirely through color changes in their skin. In all of that time, across all of those missions, nobody had ever told him to wait a second. He decided for the moment to wait. 11 seconds later, the voice came back. "Okay, sorry about that." A brief sound, something being set down on a hard surface. "This is Lieutenant Junho, Terran Frontier Courier Service, Vessel Haran, registration TFC 7741. I'm carrying a delivery to the Rhea colony on the far side of the Veil. Medical supplies, full manifest on record if you want to pull it. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to pass through." Koros looked at Preth. Preth was already pulling the registration. He found it in the Galactic Trade Database after about 20 seconds. Not in the Dominion section, but in the small attached file labeled Outer Frontier Non-Member Species Commerce Records. A file that was rarely opened because the species listed in it were generally considered too undeveloped to be worth tracking closely. The registration was real. The vessel name matched. The courier license was valid. The manifest, when Preth pulled it, showed exactly what the human had said. Medical supplies, colony delivery, standard non-military cargo. Everything checked out, which somehow made Koros more uncomfortable, not less. "Lieutenant Junho," Koros said carefully, "you are aware that you are currently approaching a Dominion military fleet of 400 vessels." "Yes, sir," Junho said. "And you are in a single unarmed courier ship." "Technically not unarmed," Junho said, in the same calm tone someone might use to correct a minor mistake about the weather. "But the weapons are pretty old, and I'd rather not get into that. Point is, I'm not here for a fight. I just need to get to Rhea." Brem leaned close to Koros's ear and said quietly, "He has weapons?" Koros ignored this for the moment. "Lieutenant, the route through the Outer Veil is currently under Dominion patrol restrictions. No non-member vessels are cleared to pass without prior authorization from Dominion Central Command." A pause. "How long does that take?" "Typically," Koros said, "between 6 and 8 standard weeks." Another pause, slightly longer. "I have medicine for sick people on Rhea. The colony put in the order 4 months ago. Some of those people might not have 6 to 8 weeks. The bridge was very quiet. Koros was not a cruel being. He was a military officer, which was different. Cruelty was personal, and his decisions were professional. But he was also not unaware that the human had just said something that would be very difficult to answer without sounding like exactly the kind of bureaucratic monster that nobody wanted to be in front of a bridge full of their own crew. He kept his voice even. "Those are the regulations, Lieutenant. I don't set them." "No," Juno agreed, without any particular anger. "I know you don't." There was a short silence, and then Junho added, "I'm going to keep moving. I'll stay on my current course, straight through, no detours, no stops. I'm not going to touch anything of yours. I'd appreciate it if your fleet didn't shoot at me, but I understand if command requires it." Brem stared at Koros. "He's still moving?" Preth checked the sensors. "Yes, sir. Same speed, same course. Heading directly toward the fleet." Koros looked at the viewscreen. The little battered ship was still coming, slow and steady, like it was driving down a road, and the road happened to have 400 warships parked on it. There was no increase in power, no change in heading, no sign of the kind of desperate maneuvering a small ship would do when a fleet was pointing its guns at it. It was just moving, calmly, steadily. "Sir," Brem said, "should I charge the forward batteries?" "Hold," Koros said. He was thinking. Something about this situation felt wrong in a way he could not immediately identify. Not dangerous. Wrong, like a puzzle where one piece was turned the wrong way, and he couldn't see which piece it was yet. He looked at the ship's energy readings again. The output was still strange. The reactor was running at a level that made no sense for a vessel that size. Not weapons hot, not military, just a lot of power for a courier ship. The kind of power that suggested either a very unusual engine setup, or a reactor that had been significantly modified from whatever it had originally been. Preth, he said quietly. Pull up everything we have on human vessels. Preth opened the file. It was, as Koros had seen before, very thin. 2 pages. Most of it was written in a tone that suggested the author had been somewhat dismissive of the subject. Phrases like limited technological development and early-stage interstellar capability appeared more than once. There was a brief note about human physiology, shorter than most spacefaring species, relatively fragile, unusually high pain tolerance for their size, and a short paragraph about their known ship classes, which listed only a few basic types. Courier ships were described as light transport vessels, lightly powered, typically unarmed or minimally armed, crewed by 1 to 3 individuals. Koros looked at the screen, at the small, patched-together ship moving toward his fleet. He looked at the power readings again. He looked at the database entry again. Something about the readings on that ship did not match anything on that list. The reactor output alone was closer to a Dominion light patrol craft than to any courier vessel the database described. The engine configuration, as best as Preth's sensors could determine, had been changed. Not broken, changed, deliberately reworked into something different from its original design. And meanwhile, in the cargo hold of the Harangue, Dara was not fixing the coolant regulator anymore. She had finished that 20 minutes ago. Now she was sitting cross-legged on the floor, with a battered handheld terminal in her lap, moving through the Dominion fleet's external communication network, with the quiet focus of someone who had done this kind of thing before. She had already found the sensor buoy frequencies. She had already mapped the fleet's patrol pattern. She was now, very carefully and very quietly, looking at the identification codes of the 3 forward sensor buoys that the Dominion had placed at the edge of the debris field. She was not doing anything to them yet. She was just looking. But her fingers were resting very lightly on the keys, the way a person rests their fingers on a door handle before they decide whether or not to open the door. Up on the bridge, Junho watched the fleet grow larger on his main screen. 400 ships. He had counted them when he first picked them up on long-range sensors, and he had been counting them again since, not because he thought he had miscounted, but because it was something to do while he waited to see what Koros was going to decide. He was not scared exactly. He had been in worse situations, or at least he had been in situations that had felt worse at the time. What he felt right now was something more like a low, careful attention, the kind that came from knowing that the next few minutes would require him to be very precise and very calm and very much himself. He opened the intercom. "Dara." "Already on it," she said. He nodded to himself and turned back to the screen. On the flagship, Koros made his decision. He opened the channel again. "Lieutenant Junho, I am ordering you to stop your vessel and hold position pending authorization review." Junho's voice came back, quiet and steady. "With respect, Admiral, I'm going to keep moving. But I meant what I said. I'm not here for trouble. I just need to get through." Koros looked at his tactical officer. Brem nodded once. Batteries ready. All 400 ships in coordinated firing position. The small courier vessel well within range. Koros looked at the screen. He looked at the power readings that didn't match. He looked at the ship that flew like it owned the space it was moving through. And for the first time in 31 years of military service, Admiral Koros hesitated. The Galactic Empire. They checked the readings twice. That can't be a human vessel. Science Officer Vel had been quiet for the last 12 minutes. This was unusual. Vel was not a quiet person by nature. She was the kind of officer who filled silence with data, who answered questions nobody had asked yet because she had already thought of them, who sent follow-up reports before anyone had finished reading the first one. Her section of the bridge, a raised platform with 3 dedicated research consoles and a curved display wall showing real-time analysis, was normally the loudest corner of the ship. Right now, It was very, very quiet. She had been running the same analysis on the human vessel for 12 minutes, in slightly different ways, trying to get a different result. She had not gotten a different result. She kept getting the same one, and the same one made no sense. And when things made no sense, Vel's usual habit was to keep running the numbers until they did. The numbers were not cooperating. "Vel," Admiral Koras said from across the bridge, "I need your report." Vel looked up from her screen. She had the expression of someone who was about to say something they knew would not be believed. "I've been analyzing the vessel's reactor output," she said. "I've run it 4 times. I want to state clearly, for the record, that I ran it 4 times before bringing this to you." "Noted," Koras said. "What did you find?" "The reactor on that ship is producing an output-to-mass ratio of approximately 4.7 on the standard energy scale." She paused. "For reference, our light patrol craft run at about 4.2. Our heavy frigates run at 5.1. The bridge was quiet. Brem said, "That's a courier ship." "It is listed as a courier ship," Vel said carefully, "in a database entry that appears to have been written by someone who never actually scanned a human vessel. The entry describes human courier craft as lightly powered and minimally modified. This vessel is neither of those things." She turned back to her screen. "The engine configuration has been substantially rebuilt. The reactor shielding has been reinforced. I can see the additional plating on the thermal scan, which suggests whoever modified this ship expected the reactor to run hot on a regular basis. The drive system appears to have been reconfigured for efficiency at close-range maneuvering rather than long-distance cruise speed, which explains why it moves so precisely through debris fields." She pulled up a comparison chart on the main display. The harangue's readings sat next to the standard Dominion classifications, like a guest who had shown up overdressed to an ordinary dinner party. "I also want to note," Vel continued, "that the hull repairs, while visually irregular, show extremely precise work on a structural level. The patches are not cosmetic. They have been done in a way that reinforces the original frame, rather than simply covering damage. Whoever did this work understood hull stress mechanics well enough to improve the ship while repairing it." "Who did the repairs?" Koras asked. "Based on the access logs and the tool markings visible on the external hull, yes, I can see tool markings at this resolution. Most of the recent work was done by one person, probably the engineer currently listed on the manifest." Vel pulled up the file. "Engineer Dara, one of 2 crew." Koras looked at the ship on the view screen. 1 pilot, 1 engineer. A vessel the size of a mid-range personnel transport. An energy output that matched a military patrol craft. "Pull up everything we have on human biology," he said. Vel had already done this, because of course she had. She put it on the main screen next to the ship analysis. The biological file was short. Average height, shorter than most Dominion species. Average mass, lighter. Lifespan, moderate. Sensory range, limited compared to Velron standards. With no compound vision, no pressure sensitivity, reduced electromagnetic detection. Physically, humans ranked in the lower third of known spacefaring species for raw strength, and in the lower half for endurance under standard conditions. "They don't look like much," Brem said, reading the file. "But look at this section." She highlighted a paragraph near the bottom of the file, a note that had clearly been added by a different researcher than the one who wrote the rest of it, because the tone shifted noticeably. It was more careful, more specific, and somewhat more uncomfortable. The paragraph described human adaptability, not as a general trait, but in specific terms. The speed with which human individuals modified their environment, their tools, and their behavior in response to new problems. It noted that humans had a documented tendency to treat technical limitations as problems to be solved, rather than fixed conditions to be worked around. It described their recorded behavior in hostile environments as, and this was a direct quote from the file, disproportionately resourceful, relative to their apparent physical and technological baseline. The final line of the paragraph, clearly written as an afterthought, said, "Further study recommended." "When was this file last updated?" Chorus asked. Preth checked. 43 years ago, sir." 43 years. Chorus looked at the ship on the screen, at the patched hull that was somehow stronger than the original, at the reactor running at military output levels inside a civilian frame, at the precise, unhurried movement through a debris field that would have required constant adjustments from any standard navigation system, or a pilot who was very, very good. "Veal," he said slowly, "in your assessment, is that ship capable of surviving an engagement with our forward line?" This, from her, meant she was being careful. "Against our forward line at full power and coordinated fire? No, the hull won't take that kind of punishment, regardless of the modifications." She paused. "But that's not quite the right question." "What is the right question?" Chorus asked. "The right question," Vel said, "is what that ship could do before we finish it. And I don't have enough data to answer that confidently." In the cargo hold of the Harang, Dara had moved past looking at the sensor buoys. She was now inside their control system. It had taken her 9 minutes to get through the outer encryption, which was honestly faster than she had expected. The Dominion used a layered code system that was technically sophisticated, but assumed the person trying to break it would be attacking from outside the network. Dara had come in through the maintenance channel, which was a side door that nobody had bothered to lock properly, because maintenance channels were never supposed to be accessed by outside vessels. She had not turned anything off yet. She was simply inside, looking around, mapping the connections between the buoys and the fleet's main sensor grid, noting which systems fed data to the tactical display on the flagship, which systems controlled targeting locks, and which systems, this was the interesting part, were responsible for the automated firing solutions that the fleet's guns used when engaging multiple targets simultaneously. She was not going to touch those, not yet. Probably not at all, but it was useful to know where they were. She sent a brief text message to the cockpit through the ship's internal system. Junho read it on the small side screen by his left hand. It said, "3 forward buoys offline on my word. Also found something interesting. Tell you later." Junho sent back, "Don't do the buoys yet." Dara sent back, "Obviously." On the flagship, Preth suddenly sat up straight at his sensor station. "Admiral, I'm picking up a data query from somewhere inside the fleet's external maintenance network." Chorus turned. "From where?" Preth ran the trace. His face went very still. "It appears to originate from the human vessel, sir." The bridge went quiet in a different way than before. Not the quiet of confusion, but the quiet of something that has just shifted from complicated to serious. Chorus looked at the view screen. The small, battered, tired-looking ship was still moving at exactly the same speed, on exactly the same course, completely unbothered. Chorus opened the comm channel. "Lieutenant Junho." "Admiral," Junho said. "Is your engineer currently inside our maintenance network?" A pause. Not a long pause. About 2 seconds. Then, "She's doing some light reading." Chorus stared at the screen for a long moment. "Tell her to stop." "I'll pass that along," Junho said. "But Admiral, I want to be clear. She's not doing anything with it. We just like to know what's around us." Chorus closed the channel and looked at Vel. Vel was already updating the file on human behavior. She had moved past the 2-page footnote entirely, and opened a new document. She was writing quickly, with the focused energy of someone who has just realized that a subject they thought was simple is in fact the most interesting thing they have encountered in years. At the top of the new document, she had written a single line as a working title. It said, "Do not underestimate the Galactic Empire. They check the readings twice. That can't be a human vessel." The Harang was now close enough that the flagship's external cameras could pick out individual details on the hull. There were more patches than the first scan had suggested. Small ones, large ones, some so old they had their own smaller repairs on top of them. The ship looked like it had been kept alive through sheer stubbornness over a very long time. One of the running lights on the port side was slightly dimmer than the other, blinking with a faint irregularity that suggested the wiring behind it had been spliced at least once. The sensor array on the nose was a mismatched collection of components from what appeared to be at least 3 different manufacturers, bolted together and angled in a configuration that no standard installation guide would have recommended. But that, Vel noted, was actually quite clever. The combination of different sensor types filled in each other's blind spots. Koros studied it all carefully. The ship was now inside the outer edge of his fleet's formation. Not deep inside, not yet, but close enough that the forward gun batteries had it well within range. Close enough that it had, by any standard military calculation, become a tactical problem rather than an approaching contact. Koros opened the channel again. Lieutenant Junho, I am giving you a final order to stop your vessel and hold position. If you do not comply, I am authorized to use force. In the background of the transmission, Koros could hear a faint metallic sound, something being moved or adjusted in the cockpit. When Junho spoke, his voice was the same as it had been from the beginning, calm, unhurried, with a slight tiredness in it that had nothing to do with fear. Admiral, I hear you. I want to be straightforward with you because I think you've been fair with me. I'm going to keep moving. Not because I don't respect your authority. I do. But because I have medicine for a colony that has been waiting 4 months, and I've run the numbers on how long some of those people have. So I'm going to keep going. I genuinely prefer not to have a problem with you. Koros muted the channel and turned to Brem. Firing solution? Ready, Brem said. All forward batteries locked. We can take it apart in under 3 seconds. Koros nodded slowly. He looked at the view screen. He looked at Vel, who was watching him from her station with an expression that was carefully neutral. What is the population of Rhea Colony? He asked. Preth checked. About 9,000, sir. Mixed species, mostly outer frontier settlers. It's a small agricultural colony, classified as developing. 9,000 people. Koros thought about that. He thought about the manifest he had read, which listed the cargo in specific terms. Medications for respiratory illness, broad-spectrum antibiotics, wound treatment supplies, not luxury goods, not trade cargo, medicine. He unmuted the channel. He was about to speak when Brem said sharply, Admiral, the ship is broadcasting. On our channel? No, open channel, Galactic Standard Frequency. Brem looked at his console with a slight frown. It's a data packet, not voice, and a countdown. Koros asked, countdown to what? Nobody answered, because nobody knew. On the view screen, the Harang continued its steady approach. The countdown in the data packet was at 40 seconds and descending. The coordinates it had broadcast were a specific point in space, a location 11 kilometers directly behind the Eternal Dominion. Vel read the coordinates twice. She pulled up the spatial map and marked the location. Then she went very still. Admiral, she said carefully, those coordinates are in a gravity compression zone, a very narrow one, created by the overlapping gravitational fields of the 2 nearest large asteroids and the fleet's own mass distribution. She paused. It would be, in theory, possible to use that zone to execute a faster-than-light microjump, a very short one, just a few kilometers. Brem stared at her. Every navigation manual in the Dominion says you cannot execute an FTL jump inside a gravity well of this density. The exit vector would be completely unpredictable. The stress on the ship's frame would be, yes, Vel said. I know what the manuals say. The countdown was at 22 seconds. Koros looked at the Harang. It was still moving, still calm. The broadcast was still going out on the open channel, coordinates, countdown, as if it were an announcement rather than a warning. as if the human on that ship was not threatening anything, but simply letting everyone know what was about to happen. "Charge forward batteries," Koraz said. "Fire on my command." "Charged and ready," Brem said. 10 seconds. "Sir," Prek said quietly. "Should I?" "Hold," Chorus said. 5 seconds. The harangue was 30 kilometers out, in the middle of the outer fleet formation, surrounded on all sides by Dominion warships with their guns pointed at it. There was nowhere to go. Even if the micro-jump worked, even if the impossible navigation through a gravity well somehow succeeded, the ship would have to re-enter normal space somewhere, and wherever it re-entered, it would still be surrounded by 400 ships. This was, by any logical analysis, a bluff. Chorus raised his hand to give the fire order. The countdown hit 0. The harangue vanished. Not slowly, not with a dramatic flash. It was simply there, and then it was not. The way a light goes out when you flip a switch. The space where it had been held. Only the faint dissipating glow of a drive signature and the scattered light of the debris field behind it. For exactly 1 second, the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was completely silent. Then Preth said, in a voice that was working very hard to stay professional, "Contact relocated. 11 kilometers directly astern. Precise match to the broadcast coordinates." Every head on the bridge turned, by instinct, to look at the rear view screen. The harangue was there, sitting 11 kilometers behind the flagship, engines running at idle, in the exact position its own countdown had announced. It had just executed an FTL microjump through a contested gravity well, at close range, inside a fleet formation, and hit its target coordinates within a margin that Vel, who was already running the numbers, with slightly shaking hands, calculated at approximately 40 meters of deviation from the announced target. 40 meters, over a jump that the Dominion's best navigation computers said was impossible. Brem had gone the color of old ash. "It's within boarding range of the flagship," he said, in a flat voice. "I know," Chorus said. "All our forward batteries are pointing the wrong direction." "I know. The aft guns need 40 seconds to cycle to full." "I know, Brem." Chorus stood very still for a moment. Then he turned to his communication station, opened the channel, and waited. Junho's voice came through before Chorus had to say anything. "I didn't come here to fight," he said. "I meant that before, and I mean it now. I'm not going to do anything to your ship. I'm not going to threaten your crew. I just needed you to understand that stopping me was going to cost more than letting me through." A brief pause. "I still have medicine for 9,000 people. I still just want to pass." Koros looked at the rear view screen for a long moment. "Vel," he said quietly, "in your professional opinion, if we engage that vessel right now, what happens?" Vel thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "It gets destroyed eventually," she said. "It cannot survive a sustained engagement with the full fleet. But before it's destroyed, I genuinely don't know. That jump used the gravity well as a tool. Our formation creates gravity wells. There are 11 other compression points around this fleet that a skilled navigator could theoretically use the same way." She stopped. "It has a lot of gravity." Koros understood what she was not quite saying. He looked at the image of the harangue sitting 11 kilometers behind his ship, calm, still, engines at idle, exactly where it had said it would be. He thought about the pilot sitting in that cockpit, eating a protein bar. He thought about the engineer who had broken into his maintenance network and described it as light reading. He thought about 9,000 people on a colony waiting for medicine. Koros opened the channel one more time. "Lieutenant Junho, Admiral, you have a clear route through the Veil. Heading 27 Mark IV will take you around the outer edge of the patrol zone with minimum contact. I'll log your transit as an authorized passage under emergency medical exception." When Junho spoke again, there was something in his voice that had not been there before. Not triumph, not relief exactly, but something quieter and warmer than either. "Thank you, Admiral. I mean that." "Don't come back this way without filing the proper paperwork," Chorus said. "Understood." The harangue moved off on the new heading, steady and calm, the same as it had always been, and passed through the Dominion fleet formation without touching a single ship, without firing a single shot, without anything except the quiet hum of an engine that should not have been running at those power levels in a ship that looked like it had been held together through stubbornness and repair tape. Chorus watched it go. Vel was still writing. H1. The Galactic Empire. They checked the readings twice. That can't be a human vessel. HR. The harangue cleared the last patrol marker at the edge of the outer veil 3 hours after it had first appeared on the Dominion sensors. Junho watched the marker light blink once on his navigation screen, and then fall behind the ship and disappear into the dark. He let out a long, slow breath, leaned back in the pilot's seat, and rolled his neck until it made a sound like a small bag of gravel being shaken. "We're through," he said into the intercom. From the cargo hold, Dara's voice came back. "Good. I'm making tea. You want some?" "Yes," he said. "Absolutely yes." He set the ship to cruise and let the autopilot take over for a while. Then he sat there in the quiet of the cockpit, looking at the stars ahead, thinking about nothing in particular. The Rhea colony was 16 hours away at current speed. The cargo was intact. Nobody had shot at them. All things considered, he thought, it had been a reasonable day. Dara came up from the cargo hold a few minutes later with 2 battered metal cups and sat in the co-pilot seat, which was slightly better padded than the pilot seat, because Junho had given her the better cushion years ago, and she had never offered to give it back. She handed him his cup and looked out at the stars for a while, without saying anything. "You found something interesting in their network," Junho said eventually. "I did," Dara said. "Are you going to tell me what it was?" "Their automated targeting system has a shared clock," she said. "All 400 ships sync to the same timing signal for coordinated fire. It's very efficient. It means the whole fleet can fire simultaneously with perfect timing. It also means that if you interrupt the clock signal for about 2 seconds, the coordination drops and they have to revert to manual targeting, which takes their fire rate down by about 60% while the systems resync." Junho looked at her. "I didn't do anything with it," she said. "I just found it." "But you could have." "But I didn't." He nodded slowly and drank his tea. "Did you close the access when we left?" "I left it exactly as I found it," Dara said, in a tone that was completely neutral. Junho decided not to ask any more questions about that. He looked at the stars instead. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Vel was still at her station when the first watch ended and the second watch came on. The new watch officers looked at her with the kind of polite uncertainty that junior officers feel when a senior officer is clearly doing something important, and they are not sure whether to interrupt. She was on her 37th page. The document had started as a field report, a standard format, the kind she had written hundreds of times, dry and technical and organized by data category. But somewhere around page 12, it had stopped being a standard field report and become something else. Something more like a warning, though she was not sure yet exactly who to address it to or how to phrase the central point without sounding like she had lost her professional composure. She was trying to explain what had happened in a way that would make sense to the Dominion High Council, most of whom had not been in this sector, had not seen the sensor readings, and had not watched a battered courier ship jump through an impossible gravity window and park itself 11 kilometers behind the most powerful warship in the Fourth Fleet. She had written and deleted the opening summary 3 times. The first version had been too technical. The second had been too emotional. The third had been accurate, but read, she felt, like something written by a person who was slightly afraid, which was not the tone she wanted. She started the 4th version. The incident in the Outer Veil on this date requires immediate attention, not because of the specific tactical events that occurred, but because of what those events indicate about a species that the Dominion has, until now, considered peripheral. She stopped, read it back. That was better. Human beings are listed in our database as a developing frontier species with limited interstellar capability. This classification is wrong. It is not wrong because the data was inaccurate at the time it was collected. It is wrong because the data was collected without sufficient curiosity. The researchers who wrote the current file described what humans appeared to be. They did not ask what humans were capable of becoming, or what they had already become without the Dominion's awareness. She kept writing. The vessel we encountered today was, on its surface, a civilian courier ship. It was crewed by 2 individuals. It carried medical supplies. It had no military registration, no weapons declaration of significance, and no affiliation with any known military organization. It was, by every official measure, a non-threat. In practical terms, it entered a restricted zone, penetrated our external sensor network without triggering any automated alert, executed a prohibited FTL maneuver inside our fleet formation with a precision that exceeded the navigation capability of our own vessels, and positioned itself at the most tactically sensitive point relative to the flagship, all without firing a weapon or making a direct threat. This was done by a pilot and an engineer making a routine delivery. She paused, looked at that line, left it in. I do not believe this was a military mission. I do not believe Lieutenant Junho or Engineer Dara were agents of any government or intelligence organization. I believe they were exactly what they said they were, courier crew trying to deliver medicine to a colony. What concerns me is the capability and the casualness with which it was applied. A species whose civilian workers operate at this level of technical competence and tactical adaptability is not a species that should remain in a 2-page footnote. The report reached Dominion Central Command 14 days later, after passing through the standard review chain. Most reports from patrol zones were processed by a mid-level administrative team and either filed or flagged for follow-up. This one was flagged. Then it was escalated. Then it was read by 3 different senior officials in succession, each of whom read it, sat quietly for a moment, and then sent it to the next person up the chain. The High Council reviewed it in closed session 11 days after that. Some council members felt that Vale's report was the work of an officer who had been startled by an unusual encounter and had allowed one incident to color her professional judgment. One member used the phrase, overreaction to a minor border irregularity. Another member pointed out that a civilian ship had penetrated the 4th Fleet's formation and reached boarding range of the flagship without being stopped, and asked whether that qualified as minor. In the end, the Council made 2 decisions. The first was to commission a full intelligence assessment of human technological development, not a 2-page file written by someone who had never actually spoken to a human, but a real assessment conducted by researchers who were prepared to take the subject seriously. The second was to formally update humanity's classification in the Dominion database. The old classification, Primitive Frontier Race, Limited Interstellar Capability, was removed. The new classification was written by Vey herself, at the Council's request, because she had clearly thought about this more carefully than anyone else. Species of significant interest. Technological baseline currently unverified and likely underestimated. Recommend non-confrontational engagement policy until assessment complete. Do not provoke. The last 3 words had been Vale's addition. The Council had debated removing them as too informal for an official classification. In the end, they left them in because nobody could think of a more accurate way to say the same thing. 16 hours after clearing the Outer Veil, the harangue made its final approach to Rhea Colony. The colony was small, a spread of low buildings on a flat plain, surrounded by fields that were a pale, dusty green in the early morning light. There was a landing platform at the edge of the settlement, and standing on it when Junho brought the ship down were 4 people in medical staff uniforms, waiting with the particular patience of people who have been waiting a long time for something important. Junho landed with his usual precision, gentle, exact, no drama, and cut the engines. Dara was already in the cargo hold, running the release seals on the medical containers before the landing struts had fully settled. The colony's medical coordinator, an older woman named Sori, came aboard as soon as the ramp was down. She walked through the cargo hold, looking at the containers, counting them, checking the seal indicators that showed whether the temperature-sensitive medications had been maintained correctly throughout the journey. Her face was carefully controlled, the expression of someone who has learned not to show too much hope until they have confirmed what they need to confirm. She checked the last container. The seal indicator was green. She stood there for a moment. Then she looked at Dara, who was standing nearby with a wrench in her hand and engine grease on her forearm, and said, "Thank you." Dara said, "The order was put in 4 months ago. We should have gotten it to you sooner." Sori shook her head. "You got it here." Junho, coming down from the cockpit, stopped at the bottom of the ramp and watched the colony workers begin moving the containers out toward the medical building. He watched Sori walk alongside them, still checking, still counting, her hands moving over the containers with the focused care of someone handling things that matter. He stood there for a while, just watching. Then he went back up the ramp, sat down in the cockpit, and started filling out the delivery confirmation. In the field marked Transit Notes, he typed, "Route delay due to Dominion Patrol Zone. Passage obtained without incident. Recommend filing pre-authorization for future runs on this route." He filed the form. Then he leaned back, put his feet up on the console, and closed his eyes. 3 systems away, in a well-lit office on a Dominion command station, a researcher was opening a new file on her desk and writing at the top of it, in careful letters, "Human Capability Assessment, Preliminary Study." She had a lot of reading to do. She had a feeling she was going to find it very interesting.